Oh, so thank you for meeting with me, Gillian, on this very rainy, horrible day. What a nice day to be inside and talking.
I
Um,
love what you're doing, so thank you for doing this service for students.
oh, very welcome. So for the audience, I know you. You are a friend of mine. I feel very lucky and fortunate to be able to say that. So I do know bits of your story. I'm looking forward to hearing more. And I'm thinking let's start at the beginning and then kind of come through, bring us bang up to date, and talk about your book and everything else that you're working on. But psychology wasn't your first career.
No, when I was in high school, and I hope, please correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology. I'm from Canada.
I think
Uh,
we know what high school is.
well, I might say the wrong word at some point. So yeah, when I was in high school, I was one of those kids who kind of liked everything, and I had a hard time deciding what to study at university. I liked English, I liked reading. But I also really like math, um, and science in general, I guess. I find it very satisfying that you follow the rules and you get the right answer at the end, and that's that was so I loved that. And so when I was deciding on a career path, I had my mom's practical voice in my head saying, "What kind of career are you going to have if you do a degree in English?" So that didn't feel like a very practical thing, and it felt like something that I could just indulge in as a hobby, just keep reading and learning on my own. And so I chose to go into math. And this was this sum total of my thinking on my career path. I said, Mom, I love math. What kind of job can you do where you get to do math? And she said, I know someone who's an actuary. And I'm like, cool, I'll be an actuary. Didn't really know what that was. I mean, there are people who work for the insurance companies and crunch all the numbers and basically decide how much money you should pay based on how likely you are to die. Um, that's what they do. But it's very math heavy. And I was like, cool, I'll do that. And so that sort of determined where I went to university. I ended up going to a university that has a Bachelor of Mathematics. So most universities, at least in Canada, you do a Bachelor of Science and you have to take a bit of chemistry and physics and math and an assortment of things. But this university has a Bachelor of Math, so I took algebra and calculus and statistics and computer science, but I did not have to take chemistry or any of the other sciences. So it was a bit unique in that. And so I started studying there, intending to go into actuarial science. Um, Fell in love with computer science, and that's what I ended up doing my degree in. Um, so yeah, finished my degree in computer science, got a job. Here in the UK, at least at Sussex where I teach, we have students can do placements. So they finish their second year, they can do a year-long placement before they go back to uni and finish their degree. Um, at the university where I did my degree, we had something called a co-op program, a cooperative education program. And that meant I did a lot of placements, a lot of shorter placements. So I studied for 8 months in my first year, September to April. And then I worked for 4 months. And then after that, it was study 4 months, work 4 months, study 4 months, work 4 months. So an undergraduate degree in Canada is usually 4 years rather than 3 here. But my degree took 5 years because I had all that working time interspersed. But those were paid placements. And so I would make enough in one term to pay for the next term of school. And I graduated with no student loans and I graduated with a job offer at the last place that I had worked.
Wow.
Yeah, really amazing. I look back and think, how lucky was I that it's not why I chose that university but I'm so glad that I did and yeah, I feel very lucky.
Well, I love your example there of I thought I'd become an actuary because your mum's friend did it, I think you said.
Yeah.
And I think we do sometimes, don't we? When we're young, we kind of make these decisions on a bit of a whim that we look back and we go, oh, I'm glad that that paid off. Or what was I thinking?
Well, my parents are both teachers, and so that was the only world I knew, right? But,
Mm,
I
mm,
didn't know about other kinds of jobs really. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard to pick something you want to do for the rest of your life when you don't know what the options are.
Yeah, yeah, and I see this as a parent to teenagers. You know, we all know, don't we? Teacher, police officer,
Yeah.
doctor, nurse. You know, there are jobs, aren't there, that
Influencer
we
these days.
yes, yes, there are jobs that we see.
Yeah.
And for my son, with his interest in science, you know, for the last couple of years, we've been thinking, well, presumably there would be lots of jobs in science, but I don't know what they are. He doesn't know what they are.
Yeah.
Um, and I
And I
guess
think,
when we were young, we didn't have the internet, did we? It was harder
no,
to do the kind of research that
yeah.
kids now can do.
And I know that there's a lot of, it feels like a bit of a dark art, the idea of sort of filling out a list of questions. My husband says that when he went to careers counseling when he was in high school, they asked him to fill out like these hundreds of questions, and then they said, "Here's your career. You should be a this." And the kind of he ended up in computer science as well. That's how we met, was at uni. And those kind of jobs didn't even exist, so they weren't in these inventories. And there's sort of, it's questionable how well those things can do at helping us figure out what might be a good fit. But I don't know. I think probably the way that parents are most useful is for helping you understand, like, reflect about what your strengths are, what you like, and also what you're not good at. So now I'm a placement tutor at Sussex, so I've been working with students who are out on placement, and I'm just reminding them to think about, what are you learning on this placement? Not just in terms of like the actual job itself, but is this suiting your personality? Do you like being at a desk all day, or do you really hate that and you need to be talking to people? And like, what kind of role best suits you? And I think those things are really hard to figure out. I think a parent probably has some insight and can help you think
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
you're really good at this. You don't seem to really like that, so maybe this kind of job isn't for you. But it is really difficult, and I think the best thing you can do is try things, but it's really hard to do that, right? So I love the idea of placements and any kind of volunteering and internships. And I know that there's, difficulties with that too, because so many of them are unpaid, but I think that's the best thing you can do to see if you're
yeah,
going to like something, is actually try it.
yeah, yeah. You've jumped ahead to my final question there
Oh,
with
good.
giving tips for people like wanting to learn more. So what we know, coming back to you, so you're working in computer science, but that's not
Mm.
what you do now. Um,
So
when
I
did you
was I
switch?
was
What
working in
showed
it,
you?
and I liked it in many ways. It was, I liked the logic of that job. I liked, eventually ended up sort of making user interfaces, and so that it came to be a job where I got to think about what the end user would need, and being able to think about what would make things easier, and I like that. Um, but I don't I don't know. It's hard to look back now. I sort of feel like I never really felt that it was where I was meant to be somehow. It didn't feel like my people. Um, I think the biggest thing was I didn't feel like I was doing something meaningful. I wanted to put something good into the world. And so I don't know. I had sort of this realization that built over time, I guess, where I somehow thought, can I see myself doing this for 30 more years or 40 more years until I
Mhm.
retire? And I just could not imagine that. I could get through every day, but thinking, like, fast forwarding and thinking, if I just kept doing this, would I feel like I spent my life well? And I was, so for a while I was trying to compensate. I have lots of hobbies, so I doing them outside of work, and I felt like, well, maybe work can't be that, and I just have to find meaning other ways. But yeah, I got to a point where I just thought, I just don't feel like I'm making an impact and putting something positive into the world, and I'm not sure I want to keep doing this. And so actually that was the first part of the decision, was I don't think I can do this anymore. And I look back now and I think there's probably another job in the same industry that would have let me do some, I could have just looked for a different position. But that seemed, I don't know, that didn't seem like the right option somehow. And so then the question was, well, what do I want to do? And that was a much harder decision. I mean, in a way, it's the same decision that, students are faced with, right? What do I want to
Yeah,
do with my life? It
yeah,
was just a few years later now.
yeah, and
Um,
potentially harder as we get older, isn't it? If we've got other
yeah,
commitments and responsibilities.
yeah.
I'm just sitting here thinking how brave you were and thinking how many people
Mm.
do just kind of bumble along, don't they? Doing jobs that they don't love
And
because
I
maybe
think
they're
I,
getting
I
paid
met,
well or it's close to home or they
yeah.
like their
Mm.
colleagues or
And that's fine,
mm,
for some people, if you can do that. I Googled it and it's like, what are my options, right? And it's like, keep doing it and just, find what you need elsewhere, um, or quit immediately and then figure something out. Or the third option was the Monte Cristo option, which is you pull out your spoon and you start digging your way out. So that's what I ended up doing was like starting to figure out what did I want to do. I took some classes, I started laying some foundations for whatever was going to come next before I entirely knew what was going to come next. So
brilliant.
I loved that advice.
Yeah,
That you can take baby steps. It doesn't have to be a drastic thing. At some
yeah,
point it does, but you can start off by just doing little things, which could even just be a conversation with someone, right? Like, what are you
yeah.
doing? Hey, what?
Because
Yeah.
sometimes the drastic ones, they're kind of clutching at straws, aren't they? I think it's so difficult for us to be in that place of uncertainty. It can be
Yeah.
very tempting, can't it, to kind of just change everything overnight.
Yeah.
So I like that what you're doing with those baby steps. You're not wasting time and money on something that you're then going to go, no, this wasn't right for me either. You're giving yourself time to check, aren't you? You do a little
Mm.
course and you think, yeah, I liked that. I want to do more
Yeah.
around that theme, or yeah, no, that's not where I'm going. I'll try something else.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. So eventually, I was just paying attention to the world around me and sort of trying to pay attention to what was sparking things for me. And it was sort of a moment. It wasn't the beginning of positive psychology, but positive psychology was having a moment. And so there was, articles in magazines and books that were coming out. And it took me a bit to realize, I think because I wasn't particularly happy at that time with my job or my relationships either, I think the idea that you could scientifically study what makes people happy, I thought this is something I want to figure out. And it felt like a very meaningful thing and something that you'd never get tired of doing, just yeah. So I realized that psychology was the thing that was connecting all these little bits that I was feeling drawn to. Um, and yeah, so I signed up for a psychology class. Um, so the university that I'd done my degree at had these, they were called correspondence courses, because back in the day they used to mail you cassette tapes and you'd listen to the lecture on a cassette. And you'd do your assignments and you'd mail them, put them in the post, and they'd get marked by someone on the other end. And I had done a bunch of these while I was doing my degree when I was doing my little placements. I was often taking, one class, one module at the time, so that when I got back to campus, I could take fewer modules. And so I knew that they offered this kind of thing. And so I started doing that. So I ended up taking just three psychology modules that way, but it was enough to help me decide
yeah,
if I was kind of into it. Um, I guess the thing that was really the turning point was that I was at that point, we had the internet, so I'm Googling and I'm trying to learn stuff and seeing, what's out there. And I knew I was really interested in positive psychology, but I also knew that I didn't have the right background, right? Like I thought I decided, maybe I'd want to do a PhD or a master's degree. Um, I had to work up some courage for that because in my mind, you have to be a genius to do that. I'm not a genius. So I had to, there was a little bit of,
imposter syndrome, I think
yeah.
we'd call that, wouldn't we?
But I thought I've always loved school and being able to study and learn like that makes me happy. I'd always been taking extra classes on various things, so I knew that I loved to learn. And that was really the key one of the things that helped me realize I didn't want to be in computer science anymore because I wanted to learn all sorts of things, but I didn't have any interest in learning more of that. And so that was a
Mm.
sign for me. Um, so I thought my way to sneak into psychology is going to be through music because I've played music since I was little, and there's an area of psychology that's all about music cognition. And there were some people who were in this city where I was living at the time, which was Toronto in Canada, who were doing research on music and psychology. And so I reached out to one of those people, sent an email, didn't hear back. But then I feel like this was so lucky. There was a conference that was put on, and it was at a university that was about an hour and a half drive from my house. It was free, and so I just signed up for the conference. And I didn't realize. I think I'm lucky this way. I don't imagine, I don't have one of the, I don't see things in my head. So I didn't really think about what it would be like to show up at this conference and walk in and until I actually got there. And I got there and I'm like, what am I doing? Everybody's going to know that I don't know anything and, they're going to turn me away. But of course they didn't. And I showed up and I got my name badge and, got the program and decided which talks to go to. I knew nothing, right? So I just followed my interests, which was great. And my job that day was to meet some PhD students and talk to them and see what it was like. And so I did that. I met some people that I'm still in touch with one of them a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah, and it was a nice small conference, and I kept running into them throughout the day, and they were completely just confused by the fact that someone who wasn't yet in the profession was at this conference, and so they're like, "How are you doing? Are you understanding things?" And for the most part, I did. I didn't understand the statistics, but I could understand the message, the storytelling, the like, here's what I studied and why, and here's what I found. A good presenter that can come through without any of the jargon and stuff. There were a couple of more technical talks that I did not understand, but then my new friends were like, well, we don't understand that either. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I think going to that conference gave me a couple things, which was just it gave me the feeling like this is really interesting. I could see myself doing this, and also the just the feeling like I could do this. The feeling that these were interesting people and they weren't necessarily, geniuses. And I felt like, I could do this. I could be I could see myself as one of those people. And then the person I had emailed was at the conference. So I went up and met him and he introduced me to his postdoc. So a postdoc is someone who's got a PhD, but isn't yet working at a university. It's sort of a middle ground, if you will, kind of like an internship. Um, and that person ended up being my master's supervisor eventually. But in the meantime, I volunteered in a lab and sort of got to see what projects PhD students were doing and helped out a little tiny bit, attended some lab meetings. But all this just helped me sort of get a concrete idea of what it would be like to do a PhD. Um, and then, yeah, anyway, I feel like there was so many lucky steps, but it was also me looking for opportunities and being willing to talk to people and do things before I felt ready. And yeah, that was a very long
You,
answer.
yeah, no, like I said to you, it feels like luck, but to me, it looks like a lot of determination and a lot of creative thinking and, perhaps noticing some of that imposter syndrome at times, but going for it anyway, like taking those chances.
Mm.
Like I love that. Um,
I also, so at psychology at the time when I started studying it, I'd studied maths, so I didn't really know much about psychology. And I think the thing that we know about psychology from the media and stuff is, therapist or clinical psychology, right? And so I thought that that's what I had to like that that's what it would mean is that I was going to be a
mhm.
clinical psychologist. I didn't understand that not all psychologists are clinical psychologists. And I had a friend who was seeing a psychologist for some reason that I don't recall. And I said, would you ask them if they'd meet with me? Because I'd read this book about happiness, and it said we're really bad at knowing what will make us happy, and that the best thing we can do, the most effective thing we can do, is talk to someone who's doing the thing that we think we want to do and see if they're happy. Like, and we think that that won't work because, they're different than we are, but actually, they have the best insight, right? And so I thought I need to talk to a psychologist. So, and I had this friend, she knew a psychologist. So I said, see if you can get this person to meet with me. And so he very kindly agreed. I bought him a coffee. I had made this giant list of questions for him. I think he was quite bemused by the whole thing. I think he was the whole time he's just like, what is happening here? But he very kindly agreed. And I asked him all these questions about what his day-to-day life was like, like not just what kind of things do you do, but like what did you do today? Like what did your day look like? Because I think that's the part that is the hardest to
Mm,
see when you're thinking about what kind of job would you like. And like I said about my placement students at Sussex, I think that's what they get to see is like, oh, my day is really sitting at my desk doing stuff, or my
mm.
day is going out and driving around and visiting patients. Like that's a very different kind of day that's gonna,
Yeah,
suit different
yeah.
kinds of people. So I asked him, that was kind of the main thing. Like, what does your day look like? What is the best thing that you do? What is the worst thing that you do? And this guy loved his job, but I walked away thinking that's not the job for me. I don't want that. Um, it was just not what I didn't feel like it suited me. And so when it came time to apply for a master's degree, oh, hello, kitty. Oh, wet kitty, great. Um, the university that I went to had two programs. They had the clinical psychology or they had psychological science, which was everything else. And almost, I think every single student who ended up studying psychological science actually wanted to do clinical but didn't get in. So it was like their second choice. I didn't. I was like me, I think the only person who said, I just want psychological science. Thank you. That's it. Then that really came from talking to that one psychologist.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? One conversation, and
Yeah.
you saved yourself. Like you could have wasted so much time, couldn't you, going down that clinical route and then having to kind of reverse out of it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, this is a brilliant, brilliant story. And I think really relevant for people about how you were working in one field and then you pivoted, moved into this other field. Lots of
Mhm.
research, lots of talking with different people, little courses, getting as much insight, as much information as you could. Um, like, and I know you've done different things in between, and I feel like we could talk all day. Um, but if
We
we
fast forward a bit
if
now.
we fast forward to so you're at the University of Sussex now,
Mm,
um, with one of the best job titles I think I've ever come across,
I
which I'll let
know.
you share. An author of a new book. Um, yeah,
Yes.
lots of cool stuff to hear about.
Um, I'll rewind. So I was at the University of Essex beforehand, and I was there for 6 years. And at some point, a colleague of mine at Essex and a friend of mine who's also a colleague who was visiting from America, she got like a visiting fellowship, and so she was spending a few months in the UK. They had both decided to go to this conference, and they're like, "You should come; it'll be fun." And it wasn't really my area. I didn't, I was like, and I'm an introvert, so going to a conference can feel like a lot, like it's really noisy and big conferences especially, people are always kind of looking over your shoulder and trying to see who is more important that they might want to talk to. And someone invites you for dinner and I think, oh, that's nice. And then you show up and there's 15 people and it's really loud and you can't talk to anyone. And like, so there's a lot of things about conferences that I really don't like. And so every time there's an opportunity to go to a conference, part of me is like, yay, conference. And also it feels like, that's part of our job is to like tell people what we're doing. And, it's a chance to sort of meet new people. And I like that. Um, but at the same time, the other part of my voice is like, no, I don't want to. And so they were like, we're going to this conference, you should come. And I'm like, ugh. But it was at the University of Sussex. And so it was only, 2-hour drive. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go. And, that decision changed my life because that is where I met Robin Banerjee, who was at the University of Sussex, and he's the head of school in psychology at the not quite at that time, but almost. And he gave a talk at that conference. And I put up my hand and asked him a question, and then I saw him in the lobby and had a little chat with him. And he's just the kindest, sweetest man. So I was asking him about his presentation. He said, "Are you giving a presentation?" And I said, "Yes." And I told him when it was, but he couldn't come. And I said, "Well, Robin, I'm not that far away. You can invite me to come down and give a talk." Um, and I didn't think he actually would, but he did. So I got to meet him again, and he does research on kindness. He was starting to sort of bring together a network of people who were doing research on kindness. So he added me to his mailing list. Um, and at some point, he got some funding to create a center for research on kindness and hire someone to be the director of that center. And so, because I was on his mailing list, I heard about this position. Um, I knew him, so I felt comfortable, asking if we could meet to talk about the position and whether he thought I'd be a good fit because, good old imposter syndrome. I, did not think that maybe it was the right thing for me. Although it sounded really great, I didn't know if I would be, you know, good enough or the right fit. And so I applied for that job, and now here I am at Sussex. So, all because I chose to say yes to that conference. So that's what took me to Sussex, and Robin picked my job title. So I'm an associate professor in the psychology of kindness,
How
which
lovely
is
is
so
that?
nice.
And what does to give you a version of that question you asked that clinical psychologist all those years ago,
Hmm.
what do your days look like? What do you do?
I mean, one of the things I love about this job is that no 2 days are the same. It's almost an impossible question to answer. There's sort of three parts to a job as an academic. So you do research, you do teaching, and then you do some admin, which is just, the work that keeps the university going,
Mhm.
marking and at the moment sort of helping supervise some placement students, so I have meetings to check in on how they're doing, that kind of thing. So that part, could be there's all sorts of different things that you can do, but it's like everybody chips in a bit with all the admin that keeps things running. So I teach a class, a module. I've been very lucky that I was told I could teach my own module. So it's a final year option, that students can choose. So I teach a module on it's called social connection and disconnection. And I mean, I would have chosen to teach positive psychology, but it was already being offered. So I had, the fun and also like stress of uncertainty, trying to decide what did I want to teach instead. And one of the things I love about teaching positive psychology is that it's really useful. Like students can see how to use it in their life. And I wanted to do something that was like that. Um, and then I thought, I want students to talk about loneliness. It's in the news. We know that it's a huge issue, especially with young people.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
want students to be able to just sort of normalize it a bit and realize that they're not the only one feeling lonely and talk about what can we do about it? How can we improve our social lives and make them richer? And it doesn't always have to mean what you think, right? Yeah, so I chose to develop that module, and I really love the teaching that I supervise. Undergraduate students all do a dissertation in their final year, so that's part of my teaching is I get assigned a group of students every year, and I help them come up with a project and collect some data and write it up. So that lasts for the whole year. So that's part of my teaching too. So that's that aspect. And then there's the research part, which is kind of the fun part, in that you get to do whatever you want. So that's one of the great things about academia is that you can kind of choose your own adventure. Um, there's a little asterisk beside that because you need to you usually need money to do that. So you need to be able to do a project that you can get other people excited about and get some funding for. So that's the one caveat. But besides that, you can sort of follow your own interests, and that's something I really love. Um, so yeah, that means coming up with ideas and figuring out how to test a question and collect some data and run some statistics and write it up and present at conferences and all that kind of stuff. The one difficult thing that I find about that, maybe I'm anticipating your question, is that a research project will often take several years from when you come up with the idea to when it finally gets published in a journal somewhere. And that can be a bit frustrating. I like finishing things, like, ticking things off the list, and I don't get to do that very often. And then I guess another sort of really difficult thing about this job, on the one hand, it feels like a really awesome thing that you don't really have a boss. You don't have someone
Mhm.
who's telling you what to do, which sounds amazing. But I think sometimes it's nice to have a boss. It's nice to have someone who helps you figure out here's what your priorities are, here's what you should be working on. And I think we all struggle with figuring out, there's a million things I could be doing. Which one should I do today? Which is the
Yeah,
right one to work on today? And, we all kind of muddle our way through that. But we don't get a lot of positive feedback or encouragement in this job. There are very few times when someone says, well done. There's a lot more of this isn't good enough, you're not getting the grant that you applied for. You're not getting accepted into this conference. We don't like your paper. You're going to have to make massive changes before we'll agree to publish it. There's a lot of rejection,
Mm,
and you have to have a really thick skin and just be able to say, okay, roll up your sleeves, try again, get as much feedback and help and support as you can to try and make it better next time and try again. And if that's something that you can't figure out how to do, I don't think you'll survive in academia. And
yeah.
and that can be a really difficult thing. So,
I'm really glad you've shared that because it seems kind of obvious when you say it, but I wouldn't have I wouldn't have predicted that. I wouldn't have necessarily expected it. And with the research, Gillian, how many research projects would you have ongoing at a time?
how many would I ideally like to, or how many do
No,
I have? I'm at a
let's
stage where
go with realistic.
I'm trying to figure out how to have fewer going at the same time because it's really difficult to switch between so many things. So that's another thing that's difficult is it's nice that every day you might be doing something different, but also it's hard to keep switching between
Mm,
things and
mm,
feel like you're not making very much progress on anything because, oh, today I have to do marking, so I have to put that project aside until I have some more time. Um, and then what often happens is I'll be like, well, I'll just work late so I can work on that thing that I was really excited about because I didn't have time to do it because I was doing all the other, yeah.
mm.
Um, Sorry, what did you ask me? I forgot
So
where
yeah,
we
kind of roughly
started.
how many research projects you
Oh,
might be working on at a time? Because when you're saying each one, yeah, it can take years from beginning to
yeah.
publishing.
Which means that it's probably smart to have more than one going on at the same time.
Yeah,
It's hard.
and different. So having for
Yeah.
me, I've only done research as part of my undergraduate degree and then as part of my clinical training. So
Mm,
it's you've got this one research project that you're working
yeah.
on at a time,
Yeah.
which I'm guessing is then very different. And yeah, the thought of
Mm.
juggling all of that does make my head hurt a bit. Um,
I think for me, like, there's there's probably I don't know. I probably tend to have like 8 or 10 going on at the same time, but partly that's through, I have PhD students, so I have one PhD student who's finished and we're still like writing up his project, so I'm still having to dip in and help get that to the finish line. I have a current PhD student who's working on things, so I have that project. I have different people that I'm working with, and so I'm not leading on all of these projects, but
mm,
friends or people that I know might say, "Hey, we're going to do, for example, there's this I'm involved in this really exciting big cross-cultural project, and it's being spearheaded by some people that I know in Turkey. And we've we I haven't really done this. They have done this. Have invited researchers all around the world. I think something like 60 or 70 countries to collect data all on the same question, and then we'll pool it all together to try and understand, how there's cross-cultural differences in how often people talk to strangers and what they worry about when they decide whether or not to do it and this kind of thing. So they came to me and said, we have this really cool project. Do you want to get involved? Um, and so that's been going on now. We have not collected any data. They've decided to there's too much information, but anyway, it's been going on for multiple years now.
Mhm.
So it's not very active, but every once in a while I'll get an email. It's like, oh, we've made a step. Could you give some feedback on this? And so I have to dip in
Mhm.
for a bit and be like, okay, what are we doing again? And sort
Yeah.
of um, and keep it going. So I have, there's various projects where other people are leading, but I'm part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the hard thing there is I don't know when it'll pop up again. And so it's hard to
Yeah.
budget the
Yeah.
time because you don't know when you're going to need it.
Yeah.
And then there are projects that I'm leading. So yeah, there's various things. Sometimes you end up dropping them or they just sort of go into limbo because something else becomes more important. And I hate having you know, those loops that are open. So that's something I struggle with is switching back and forth and yeah,
Yeah.
trying to keep something going. I'd love to just be able to throw myself into something and take it to the finish line, but it feels impossible because there's all the other things that pull you away. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think I've gotten more patient over time and just more accepting that like this is going to take as long as it takes and there's no hurry. But it is still something I find a bit difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. And then shall we talk about your book,
Okay, yeah. I have
um,
right
which I have
here.
read and I loved. Oh, good. I'm glad you've got it there.
My microphone is currently sitting on it, so
Oh, so not only is it a good read, it's also a good mic
exactly.
stand. Good to know. So, I mean, I've read the book and I loved it. I loved it because
Thank you.
I found it a really riveting read. And as your friend, it was awesome to read so many of your stories that we've not had a chance yet in real life to talk about. So it helped. Yeah, I loved learning more about you and
And
your
my dad.
story, your adventures, and your lovely dad. Yes, um, and it really made me think a lot about. I guess this is where psychology is perhaps different to some of the other sciences because there is space, isn't there, for the personal to come
Mm,
into it. And
yeah,
obviously, you've been drawn to learn more about talking to strangers because it was something you saw your dad doing. It was something you used to find difficult to do.
yeah.
Um, and I really resonate with that. The areas that interest me, there's always some kind of personal connection,
Mm,
which I feel like must be quite different if you're a chemist or a biologist.
yeah.
You wouldn't have that same. One of my sports psych friends calls it me search.
Yes. I
Um,
was
I
gonna say
hadn't
that.
I hadn't
Yeah.
heard that term before. I was like, yes, that really
Yeah, I think
resonated
a lot
with
of
me
us
first
end
said
up
it.
studying something that so in this case it's something that I do, right? I do talk to strangers. I sort of came to it accidentally, if you will. Sometimes it's me search in terms of people studying something that they don't do, that they struggle with, that they want to do. So it's like wish fulfillment or something almost. It can be either way. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps us to develop the skills that we need,
Yeah.
doesn't it? And we don't always realise that in advance. I know for me, sometimes I've found myself at a conference and then there's been a light bulb moment of, oh, this is because of my relationship with this person. That's why I needed
Mm,
to learn about whatever that conference has been about.
mm.
Um, but yeah, if we think about so talking to strangers, how long has it been that you've been researching that? And what would be your kind of takeaway messages for people other than do it?
That is the takeaway. So I started my master's degree in 2007, and that was on music cognition. And then I moved to a different university when I started my PhD, which I started in 2009. Um, and when I showed up there, where it was my supervisor studies happiness, and she was like, "What makes you happy?" And I said, talking to strangers. Um, and that's when I kind of started studying it. So I don't know, do the math. I guess that's coming up on 20 years almost, right?
Gosh, that makes me feel old. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the nice things about doing research is, not all my research has been on that topic. I
Mm.
have dabbled in other questions as well. So, but a lot of it has been, that's been the through line, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah. And why should we talk to strangers? How does it, like,
Oh,
what's important about it?
well, gosh, where to begin? I mean, it's hard to answer. Right? I wrote a whole book trying to convince you to tell you about all the reasons that you should do it. I guess one way I've been thinking about it recently, again, kind of going back to positive psychology, which is where my whole journey began, is um, psychologists think that a life well lived is a life of pleasure or a life of meaning and purpose, right? And more recently, a third proposal is a life that is rich, that has excuse
Excuse
me,
me.
tight, a variety of interesting experiences, right? And I think talking to strangers ticks all those boxes, right? I think it's it's it ticks the pleasure box because it's often enjoyable in a low key way. You have a laugh about someone's silly dog, or um, you learn something interesting, and that's fun. Maybe you get a recommendation for a restaurant and you try and it becomes your new favorite or something like that. So I think it ticks the pleasure box. I think it t ticks the box for like just I feel like it's really enriched my life. I've learned so many new things from talking to people, and sort of gives you a window into just the idea that people can live their lives in so many different ways, Like I talked to a sperm bank manager, and I talked to a theatrical wig maker, and I talked to someone who does bat first aid, which I didn't know was a thing. And it just like it's just given me this window, and it just makes the world feel bigger and more, yeah, it's just exposed me to all sorts of things that I didn't know that I didn't know,
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then I think it also it provides purpose and meaning because from the research that I've done, it's very clear that when you smile at someone or give them a compliment or have a little chat, that it's appreciated, right? It's seen as an act of kindness. And I think most people, if they stop and think about it, can think of a time when maybe inadvertently a stranger has made a real difference. Maybe during a hard time, like a difficult moment, and someone just said, "Are you okay?" or smiled at you at just the right moment when you needed that, because you're having a rough time. I share a story about that, but I think many people have those stories. And so it feels really meaningful to me to think that I might be that person for someone else. That if I do it enough times, there's been people who've said, I really thank you for talking to me, and it was a meaningful thing. Um, but even without that, I think we're just living in a time where there's less face-to-face human connection. We've sort of
Mm.
designed it out. You used to have to talk to strangers more often, like when I was in high school, I got a paycheck. It was literally a check, and I had to go to the bank and I had to stand in a queue and I had to talk to someone at the bank. I don't know the last time I had to go to a bank. We've moved everything online,
Yeah,
and it's more
yeah,
convenient and it's efficient and it's great, but it means that you don't have to talk to people. And I think there's so many ways that we've figured out how to avoid those little friction moments. Um, but so now we have to choose them. So I
yeah,
think what I'm
yeah.
trying to do with this book is say, there's all these opportunities out there. There's so many good reasons for doing it. Um, and you can do it. You're more capable than you think. So I think we get in our heads. We feel like we don't know how to do this. Like there's research on that. Like it's not just a few people. Like most people think they don't know how to do this, which is not true. So I just want people to know, like you can do it, even if you're shy, like I was, even if you're an introvert, even if you don't have a lot of time. It's something you can do. It's not that hard, and it's so meaningful because we are not having those moments of connection. So just showing someone that you see them as a fellow human feels like an especially powerful thing these days, in particular because we have less of that. So it feels even more important and meaningful to me.
Oh, I love that. And I just want to say as well for everyone listening, like I found your book um just a really nice read. You know, it wasn't because some people might be thinking, oh, is that like reading a textbook? Is that going to be very difficult to access? I found it was such a nice balance of your stories, your memories, and yes, presenting the psychological research that underpins exactly what you were saying just a moment ago. So people worrying about not being good at talking to people, and then the research that kind of debunks that myth. Um, so for me, it was like that perfect balance of yes, there's the
Thank you.
science in there. This is not just your opinion or kind of your musings on the topic. But for me, I read for relaxation. I don't want to have to work at it. I did English Lit A
Me
level.
too.
I've worked at reading, and I've obviously read journal articles and more serious, like more not more serious, but more like more heavy going texts.
Mm,
So I loved that the book was just a
thank you.
nice, easy read.
I read it
Um,
out loud. I thought if I can't say it, if it doesn't feel natural to say it, then I need to reword it. So I think that that makes it feel easier to process somehow. Because it
that's
is
such a
just
great
like someone talking, I hope.
that's such a great tip.
Oh, I
I've
do
never
that whenever I think that's a great tip for any student for any essay.
Yeah,
I always read it out loud because it doesn't sound the same like out loud. You can't just read out loud in your head, like literally out loud, maybe to my
yes,
cat. But it sounds different when you do that, and it always helps me find some places that I need to smooth out or
yeah,
rephrase or
yeah.
yeah.
I was a bit embarrassed a few weeks ago. My son came home earlier than I was expecting him to, and I was sitting in the kitchen talking out loud a webinar I was going to be delivering. And I felt like I needed to explain to him that, I can prepare it, I can prepare the slides, I can think it in my head, but it's only when I say it out loud that I realise I can't explain that bit very clearly, or I've got these bits
Yeah,
in the wrong
yeah,
order. I get
yeah,
I get to the middle of a sentence and I get lost.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
but I
totally
hadn't
agree. And
thought of
also get a sense of the timing in that
yeah,
case, like how long
yeah.
it's going to take to do it.
Yes, but I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about doing that for other kinds of writing.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I'm taking that away. Thank you. Um, so we've talked a bit about your kind of tips for people interested in becoming psychologists, which I think would sum up as talk to as many people as you can, do the research, think about your strengths, think about what day-to-day life might look like and whether that's
Mm.
something that appeals to you or not. Is there anything else that you'd say to people who might be interested in being psychologists?
Not unless you want the really depressing part, which is just, universities are going through a kind of moment right now. Like if you love the idea of becoming a professor someday, I cannot predict what that's going to look like by the time you get
Mm,
there,
mm,
Um, because yeah, all the political stuff. There's a lot of layoffs right now, and it's hard to know. Like it feels like a moment of big change in how universities work, and it's really hard to know. It like the job market right now is just awful because there's like hundreds and hundreds of people losing their jobs, and there's no jobs for them to go to. Um, so it's kind of a scary time to be an academic at a
mm,
university.
mm,
So I feel like that's something that needs to be said. I mean, it's always been a difficult job, because there's so many people who do a PhD and then only a small fraction of them end up becoming a professor. It's just it really is. There's a lot of attrition. Sometimes it's by choice. People finish and they're like, I'm done. I don't want this. But other times it's people who'd like this job but can't it's kind of a persistence game. Like I definitely had moments where I thought, okay, I guess I'm not going to be able to find a job in academia. I finished my PhD. I managed to get a postdoc, like I mentioned before.
mm.
There's not so many of those. It means doing something, working on someone else's research. So you have to find something that you're at least kind of interested in, right? And often that could be in another country or in or a different part of the country, somewhere you don't really want to go. So you have to kind of be willing to pack up and move somewhere for a short period of time to do this position. And then, to find a permanent post, there's not that many universities, right? They don't always have jobs that are opening. So you have to be
Mm,
kind of willing to move around and yeah. So it's kind of a long game that can be really
yeah,
difficult.
yeah,
To finally end up getting one of these positions. So it's not an easy path.
yeah. That's really important to say,
Practically
isn't it?
speaking, it's important
Yeah.
to know that. So if it's, I tell students come to me sometimes, they're like, I want to do a PhD. I want to be a professor like you. And I'm like, are you sure? And I want to be clear. I'm not saying like, that I don't think that they're capable, because I do think that anybody who's willing to work hard could potentially get a PhD. But it is doing a PhD is it's difficult in terms of, you're totally self-directed. It feels like this pressure. You're meant to come out the other end as an expert on something. And if you're anything like me, it's hard to ever feel like I just wrote a book and I
Mm,
don't feel like I'm an expert. I couldn't bring myself to write a book that's like, I am the expert. Let me tell you everything. I felt comfortable writing a book like, here's my story and here's what I know.
mm,
I could, I still don't feel like an expert in many ways. So that is a difficult thing. It can be kind of a lonely thing to be a PhD student. Um, and there's all this rejection, like I said. So
yeah,
it's a very
yeah.
difficult thing to just do a PhD. And then if you want to become an academic, you're still not done. Like it's really difficult to get from that step to becoming a professor. So when students say, I want to do a PhD, I really sit them down. I'm like, if you're so passionate that you cannot imagine doing anything else, the idea of doing research and discovering new things and, being able to come up with these questions and really dig into them and understand, like, if curiosity is the thing that drives you, maybe this is the job for you. But unless you are 100% sure, I don't think I'd do it.
Mm,
Having said that, I am really glad I did mine, but I am a very curiosity-driven person. And so
yeah,
I think even if I hadn't managed to get a job in academia, I met really interesting people, and it was a really rewarding and it really pushed me and helped me grow. And it was a really, valuable experience. But it's important to go into that knowing that, you know, you might not get a job as a professor at the other end. So you have to be at least, aware of that. And I
yeah,
think I think I was like I'd heard that, but I thought, well, I'll be fine. But really, like it's
yeah.
and I would realize that every year when I go to a conference and there'd be 5,000 people and like the majority of them are PhD students and they're all going to be looking for the very small pool of jobs on the other end. And it can be really depressing. It's like, how is that going to be me? There'll be thousands of applicants for
Mm,
one
mm,
job.
yeah. So
So,
really important
so
that
end
people.
on the downer.
Well, no, because I like the I was thinking that. Oh no, I don't want to end on a downer. But I like the reframe of because I can imagine some people. If you've been in education your whole life, if you've gone straight through to uni and then you've maybe gone straight through into doing masters, PhD. Um, and this might sound a bit mean, but I can imagine for some people it's almost like a sort of lack of imagination or a
Yeah,
lack of looking at other options. And it's like, oh, I
yeah,
like what I'm doing. I'll stay here and I'll do
yeah,
that PhD.
yeah,
And to me, it sounds like what you're saying is no, don't just do that because it feels like an obvious next step.
yeah,
Like, do that, do the research, make sure that you know why you're doing it,
yeah,
make sure you know that you're suited to it, make sure you've got a realistic sense of what the challenges might be afterwards.
yeah, absolutely.
And then do it and enjoy it and yeah, get
Yeah.
everything you can from it or not
Kind of
because
full circle, if you think about it, doing an undergraduate dissertation is your way of testing whether you might want to do a PhD, because it's a smaller version of what you would be doing in a PhD. So if you do an undergraduate dissertation in psychology, you do a research project, and you're like, this is the best thing ever. I want to do this. Then maybe it is for you. But that's your way of sort of testing it out. I
yeah,
need to change my battery. Hang on a sec.
brilliant. I was gonna actually, oh no, I'll let you change.
Don't worry, I'm an expert.
That was so speedy because I was going to
Thank
say, oh,
you.
but without, I'm just going to kind of say
No
thank you and
problem.
pause the recording. But no, you did the battery super fast. But I will again say
I
thank
think
you.
that is a nice end point. We kind of looped back to the
Yeah,
try it out first.
yeah.
Uh,
Try it out.
yeah,
Make sure you're sure, and then
yeah.
enjoy it. So
And
do
I
you,
think one message from my career path too that I always tell students is that you can change your mind. So, I started in computer science, I ended up in psychology. I hope people never feel like they're stuck in a job. Whatever point you're at, there is a way to switch to something else. And I tell students all the time, when they're graduating, they're looking for their first job. You're not going to find your first job is not going to be your dream job. That is highly unlikely. You're going to take a job. It's probably going to be so much simpler and more boring than you hope. And you're going to get really good at that job because you're clever. You just graduated from university. You can do this. That's when your real job starts. Your real job
nice.
is to figure out what you want to do next. Your real job is to look around and see what everybody's doing and be like, that looks interesting. And then what you do is you say, hey, to your manager, hey, can I go and help out over there? And they're like, you want to do extra stuff? Sure. And you go try that because you can't get a job doing something until you've already done it, which is one of the crazy things about how life works.
Mm,
So just go do it,
yeah,
just do extra. And that's your real job. And then just keep doing that. So don't feel like you're stuck. Just keep looking until you find something that makes sense for you. And you probably don't even know what that is until you see it. So you have to just keep looking around.
I love that. Let's have that as our final words. Thank you
Perfect.
for your
Thank you.
time. I'm going to stop the recording. My iPad is not cooperating. Oh,
Good old technology.
there we go.